Thank you for tuning into another episode of 22 at the Lips. This is the podcast from EMS personnel, first responders, to anybody in EMS, the first responder field, and honestly, anybody in between. Because, like I've said, this podcast is for people to learn, to grow, to hear from other providers, but also just whoever wants to tune in. So, I've talked about a lot of topics on this podcast, and one that I feel like I haven't really disclosed enough about is overcoming imposter syndrome, and especially as a new paramedic. So, personally, my story about imposter syndrome was my first call as a baby paramedic. We're talking day one, fresh out the gate, just cleared all my shifts as a newer paramedic. And it was my first call, first day. And we got dispatched to, it was an abdominal pain. We get there, I run all the tests, I'm running the call well, doing all the things I got to do, did 12 lead, et cetera, et cetera. But it was the moment when I'm in the back and my partner is like, we've situated the patient, hooked him back up to the monitor, and my partner's walking out and he's like, "Hey, you need anything else?" And I was like, "No, I think I'm good." He's like, "All right, see you at the hospital," and closed the doors. And I looked at the patient and then I looked at the back doors and I was waiting on somebody else to hop in, like, "All right, this is your call." And then it just kind of hit me. I'm like, this is it. This is where life begins. And I was kind of waiting on the patient to be like, tell me I'm on like a prank TV show and cameras pop out of like the cabinets or something, which didn't happen. And so everything went well. We get to the hospital. I'm giving a report to the RN, and it's that moment where I was so shocked that they just listened to what I said and didn't roll their eyes and ask where the paramedic was. Like, it was me. So, and to be quite honest, this is still something that I face, even as a year and some change paramedic. So, if you're asking yourself, Alexis, what is imposter syndrome? I'm glad you asked. So, according to the great philosopher Dr. Google, imposter syndrome is the condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally, despite being high performing in external objective ways. So imposter syndrome, like, there's a lot of aspects to it. Some of the common symptoms that you can kind of see, you can kind of feel are you have self-doubt of your intellect and skills, there's low self-esteem, you discredit successful moments and opportunities. Obviously, there's stress, and it can even extend to having like discomfort and being uncomfortable when you're recognized. So pretty much it's anything that when the time arises and you have something good going for you, or you're reviewing calls with people that you start beating yourself up and having thoughts like, "Oh, I'm not good enough." Or like when you do something well and someone gives you a compliment and says like, "Hey, good job," or "Hey, nice nice job doing that," whatever it is, you just want to look at them and say like, "Are you sure?" Or even as a I talked about an experience, like it's those moments when you ask yourself, like, am I really able to do this? So, and it's not just EMS personnel, it can be executives. There's even actors and actresses like Tom Hanks and Tina Fey who are reported to having imposter syndrome. So it's not just these baby EMTs and paramedics, but it's kind of global. However, it is reported that the group that suffers the most among people with imposter syndrome are healthcare professional students. And personally, I think it's the idea that you're working at a higher level of pressure with a very high stake environment. So why I think we're kind of more prone to imposter syndrome is the idea that like you are paired with an FTO, field training officer, whenever you're clearing, whenever you're going through clinical ride times. And obviously, they've proved their capability to work as a paramedic and they have the experience. So you kind of start comparing yourself to them in a way. It's also this view that you have that you lack the experience. Like, I'm not good enough to do this because I've just started, or, well, I missed XYZ, so obviously I'm not good enough. And it's also the overwhelming arc of responsibility in this profession, because you go from being an EMT, a BLS first responder, basic life support, to then you're now you're now expected to work as an advanced life support provider, and kind of this thing of you view yourself as having to have all the answers, which you quickly find out is not true. So I kind of want to bring on somebody else to talk about it. His name is Geoff Murphy. He is from Canada, and I'm personally a huge fan. If you know anything about Master Your Medics, this is the guy. So, Geoff, if you want to kind of tell the people who you are, what you stand for, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. What's funny is that I think that because we're from Canada, it's a different type of spelling. And for everyone that is here that wants to kind of laugh a little bit at Alexis here, or I'll just call her Alex for the time being, just to bug her a little bit here. But yeah, my name's Jeff. It's just spelt like Geoff, unfortunately, for people that have to try and navigate. So thanks for having me today and talking about the talking about imposter syndrome. I think that it's something that I love your story about, kind of like, oh, me, like I'm the one that's going to be the focus. Great. And it's funny is that I don't think that really goes away when it comes to as the older that you get in this industry. So I'm looking forward to talking about this. So thanks for having me.
So, Jeff, if you want to tell the people, like, do you have a personal experience or like a story? Is there a time when you recognized it? Like, how has it affected the way you work? Have you gotten past it? Like you said, like you always have it, but how do you get better about it?
That's a good question. And I think that to answer the kind of point blank, I don't think it gets better. And I don't think that it ever goes away. I think that you just get better at managing it. Or if you're focused on it and you choose to get better at it, then you can get better at it. And yeah, I've got a million examples, and even new ones for that matter as well. I mean, we could just go back to working on an ambulance. I mean, when I first got on an ambulance, first time I walked on it, the first call that I had as a student, as a primary care paramedic, which is your equivalent to an AEMT. That's the kind of the first level that you get on an ambulance with here. And I was with my preceptor, so super nervous. I think I was 19 years old, and we go to an MVC, and this patient's reporting chest pain, and that's why the incident occurred. The MVC occurred. So I'm like, okay, cool, sounds good. I'm going to do a full assessment, and I was pumped. I was ready to go, nervous as heck. And we get there. My preceptor brings the patient to the ambulance so I can do the assessment. Just because I hadn't gotten the okay to be able to like manage those types of incidents yet. So we bring him to the back of the ambulance, and I go, "Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm a paramedic, and how you feeling today?" Tells me he's got chest pain. I'm like, "Okay, sounds good." And for some reason, my head went, after I found out that he had chest pain, the first thing that I wanted to do was go down to his feet and check his motor of his feet and get him to push down on my hands. And so it's just like that was that's no joke. That's really what I did. And I've never seen so many deadpan stares of like, oh my gosh, is this guy for real? And it's just where my head went. And it's kind of a crazy thing to think about that story now and to where I am. And so even I just got back from FAST, which is a critical care conference that I get the privilege of speaking at. And a for those of you who don't know Michael Laurier, he's one of the medical directors of Flightbridge Ed. He came up to me and he says that, hey, we love what you're doing at Master Your Medics, and I just want you to know that I wanted to come and shake your hand and meet you because we send our students to you all the time in order to take your courses and to learn from you. And I'm like, well, as much as it's an amazing thing, and it's kind of like in my head, I'm going, really? The dude that did the motor assessment on a patient, the first call that I get is now shaking hands with and medical directors that fully appreciate what I'm teaching their students. I'm like, thank God they don't know about that story. So it's just kind of one of those things where it's just like it doesn't really go away, but you kind of almost have to laugh at yourself a little bit with those kind of situations where it's just like it's kind of a surreal moment where it's just you have these things where like you are not equipped to handle this. That's how you feel in imposter syndrome, regardless of how many experience you get. And I think that you have a choice in those situations where you're either allowing yourself to be humbled, learn from it and move on, or you can allow yourself to be crumpled by it and kind of fall under the pressure of feeling like you're not enough. And it's really comes down to your choice to either get up and punch through it, or to allow it to kind of push you under.
Absolutely. And we're going to kind of touch base on the idea of like learning from your mistakes and growing from it. But um, I want to talk about some strategies and things that, because I don't want people to listen to this and be like, well, all right, imposter syndrome, I have it now and I'll forever have it. There's no way to get out of it. Like, kind of like we said, you'll always have a tinge of it, but it's more of like having the confidence to get through it and to learn from it and using it for your benefit, more or less. So, personally, what I've kind of adapted to doing, and from even what other providers have told me, my FTOs and coworkers and stuff like that, a couple of little, I guess, sayings and things I keep in the back of my mind when, for instance, I work in a new agency now and I was clearing there. And it was like one of the first, not necessarily critical calls, but more higher stake calls. It was a shortness of breath, did all the things, blah, blah, blah. And the FTO was like, all right, do you want to do anything else? And I looked at the patient and I looked at the monitor. I was like, no, I think I'm good. And he was like, is there anything else you want to push? And I was like, Zofran? He's like, Solumedrol? And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, wow. And it was that moment where I was like, gonna just like take my patch, rip it off and say, all right, well, that's it. I'm done. But some of this is actually what he told me. So the first little tidbit is, you know, the material, act on it.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like we go through school and it's an intense program. You learn all the things and you have to keep studying. But once you know what to do, you have to have that ability to look within yourself and say, all right, I know it. I can be book smart, but I can also be street smart. I can know these things and I can act on it.
Mhm.
And secondly, kind of what we talked about is you have your failures, you have your moments of, oh gosh, why did I do that? Why did I check the feed on a chest pain? And then you grow from it. Because that's, I would say 85% of this field is literally you have to learn from the experience. And you have those moments where after a call, you do a self evaluation. And instead of saying, oh, I made this mistake, this is the end, you say, I made this mistake and I will forever remember this. And next time I'll do better.
Mhm.
Another piece that was kind of crucial to me whenever I first started working as a full-blown paramedic, you are not expected to work as a 5-year medic. When you are just starting out, you are not expected to be held to the same standard of your more experienced providers. And kind of like I talked about book smart versus street smart, there are things that school doesn't teach you because you learn from experience. There are things that they teach you in school and you learn about all the mechanics, the AMP, the this, that, and the other, the endocrine system that I still don't have a grasp of, but we're going with it. And then there are things that you learn along the way. And that's why you have your clinical ride times. That's why you have your clearing times at an agency. And more importantly, like, that's why you have the people that you work around, and you have people that say, hey, if you ever have a question, reach out to me. If you ever want to talk about something, give me a phone call. And also a plug, if you don't have those people, you need to reach out and try to find somebody. It needs to be people that you trust. But worst case, shoot me an email. Let me know, because it is crucial to your beginning to have those people.
Hmm.
So
I think that's like some really good anecdotes there. And the first one I really want to touch on, because I think that this is probably the most important one, especially as you're trying to develop as a new paramedic and a new EMT, is that I guess one of the examples that I give you is when was the last time that you, or let's say the first time that you intubated a patient or attempted to intubate a patient, and it failed, you weren't able to get the tube. What was your first thought in your head?
first thought was, honestly, it was, well, that's just how I work as a paramedic, because I don't do anything that's good enough.
Hmm. See, I
And
was feeling very similar to that. And when I miss a tube, even to this day, um, luckily it happens less now than it did previously. But even to this day, and like the first one that I missed, I still remember thinking like, well, that's it. I'm done. Like clearly I'm not cut out for this. And I remember that feeling, and I remember feeling really defeated. And so that's the first part. And I remember going to my paramedic partner at the time. Was he already was he was already a flight paramedic at the time, and he was like 5 years into it, and he talked me through very similar to what we're talking about right now. And he said that you either have a choice. You can realize that it's not your best skill and go into the training office and grab a laryngoscope, grab a tube, and start going through your sequences over and over and over again, and recognize that it's not your best skill and make it your best skill. Or you can wait for the next time that you have to intubate and pray to God that you learn from your mistakes, and then you successfully get the tube. Like one is going to keep you pounded down and keep you nervous and stressed out because you're going to be thinking about the last tube that you did. Or the other way is that I've trained for this. I recognize my weaknesses. I made them better, and I'm ready for this. There's two different options, and one gives you a heck of a lot more success at being confident and feeling like that you've achieved something, and the other one doesn't. And I think that's a big difference in overwhelming imposter syndrome and not allowing it to become you. And I like that about what you're saying, is that you can either, walk away and pretend that it doesn't affect you, or you can face it head on and learn from it.
and I'm so glad you brought up the point of like going back to your skills and stuff like that. And I think this even branches out to the different, I guess, categories of calls, because we all have some aspect of a particular body system or a particular situation, a particular call that like we get a little more nervous going to it, because it's that uncomfortable feeling of, man, I hope I do well, or man, I hope it's not actually this going on. And for me, it's not as bad, but it was definitely pediatrics, because they were a whole class in their own. And so we were going, it was back when I was working in Utah, and I was working with, I would say, in the top 3 of my favorite partners ever. But we're headed to this call, we're going lights and sirens. And I look at my partner, I'm like, hey man, I'm just gonna be very blunt. If I freeze up, can you take over? And he looked at me, he's like, actually, no, this is all you. And I said, sir, what?
Mhm.
And he told me something, and I'll never forget it. He said, any type of call or any skill, anything in this field that you feel uncomfortable about, more than likely it boils down to you just don't know enough about it. He's like, so we're going to get through this call. He said, after this call, we're going to go back to the station and we're going to review pediatrics. until the next call. And we got through the call, obviously. But we reviewed the snot out of why their vital signs are different, the different diseases that they have versus, like, I don't experience epiglottitis when I have RSV or anything like that, but why they get it and what to do in certain situations, the ACLS aspect of it. And it helped me so much that now, like, going to pediatric calls, my heart rate still increases a little bit, but I don't have that overwhelming feeling of like, oh God, what do I do? Or I don't freeze up. And it all goes back to this thing that I preach and many other providers preach, that if you don't continue to grow and to learn and open up a textbook and review stuff or review skills and stuff like that, if you don't continue to grow, you will grow stagnant and you will die in this field.
I like that. I think that's a an incredibly morbid way to look at it, but it's totally true. It's true, and you can, and it's, if you look at the great paramedics that are in your life, you're thinking about them now, the ones that you look up to, those paramedics chose to excel, and they probably don't think they're great, which is a good little tip, but they chose to excel. And I want you to focus on the word that I'm using there, is they chose it. They're not supremely talented. The world is full of supremely talented people that try and live off their talent, and it often doesn't work. The ones that are great are the ones that chose to recognize that talent and to continue to get better. And I can guarantee you that every single great paramedic that you look up to is doing that. They choose to do that because they feel that imposter syndrome that you're feeling right now, and they felt it through their entire career. And they may not identify it as imposter syndrome, but it's a feeling of inadequacy is really what that is. And we're going to keep reiterating the same thing, is that you have a choice here, is that you can either feel and be overwhelmed by the inadequacy, or say, go screw yourself, I'm going to get better. And then eventually, if 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you're going to have paramedics that are in your spot right now that are, a year in or 6 months in, looking at you because you chose to excel. And they're going to look at you saying, that's a great paramedic because you did that. So that's really what it all boils down to, is the choices that you make, as hard as they can be. Choices are not easy, but that's the choice you have. And doesn't matter how crappy preceptors might be, or your clinicians that are around, your FTOs, it doesn't matter what they say or what they do. What matters is how you respond when things aren't going your way. And I think that's really what it boils down to. And little anecdotes to help you is that I can always just be confident, but that's easy to say and a lot harder to do. And I guess my advice in that situation is to make a choice to be confident, make a choice to be better, not just be confident, but be better. Confidence will come as you learn the process of choosing to train and to be better and better, and with experience that will come. But like I said, to this day, I still feel imposter syndrome, not just on the ambulance, but in the people that come up to me and say hi and say how great I am. And that kind of is difficult to take because I view myself as very human. And I think that everyone else feels themselves as human. And just like you were saying with Tom Hanks saying that he feels imposter syndrome, and I bet it's because he feels very human and he doesn't feel extraordinary. And that's what imposter syndrome is all about. And I think that's something that we all need to think about, especially in the pre-hospital setting, is that I don't feel extraordinary. I feel like a paramedic that continues to try and get better, and it's worked out. But I'm still human. I'm still super normal. I mean, after this podcast, I'm going to go out and I'm going to, plant some bushes in my front yard. Like, so super normal. Like, I'm a dad with 2 kids and 2 dogs and a wife. And like, I don't view myself as extraordinary at any means whatsoever. I'm a super normal person. And I think that's where a lot of imposter syndrome comes from too. But yeah, those are the kind of things that you need to look at. I know that it's daunting. I know it's stressful. Alexis, I'm sure you go through it. Just the same, even being part of this podcast and talking to people and interviewing people. And then you probably think like, who the heck am I to interview these people? But you've had some amazing people on this podcast. James Boomhauer for a great example, probably one of the most exceptional speakers I think I've ever heard speak. And he's been on your podcast, and I'm sure that it's just kind of like, who am I to interview that guy? And sometimes even me shaking his hand and having a candid conversation or having his phone number to call him is kind of like, who am I to have this guy that I view as an exceptional speaker and an exceptional paramedic? Who am I to have his phone number? And so those things, it just keeps on coming. And so you just have to embrace it and enjoy the fact that these people want to be in your company, and these people want to talk to you and learn from you, and also continue to develop themselves. I think it's kind of a wild thing, but it doesn't go away. And you have a choice to embrace it or let it overwhelm you.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring up the podcast, because when I first started this, I literally asked myself, I'm like, okay, who's actually going to listen to this and who can I actually have on? And I still, like, when we first started this episode, it took about like 3 times because I can't get it together in intros, because I asked myself, I'm like, when this is put out, are people really going to listen to it? Because I'm still fresh into being a paramedic. I mean, honestly, still kind of fresh into being an EMS in general. So, and that's the key, is that like, it's not just in your job you feel imposter syndrome. It's in a lot of aspects. So kind of want to leave the listeners with some in the moment things you can do, or things that these are things that I still do to this day. Even on the last shift that I worked recently, it's stuff that I had to like go back and do, because I'm like, man, they were like, I was told like, oh, hey, after today, like, you're cleared, you can start working by yourself on the truck, like, congratulations. I looked out the window and started crying, because I was like, are you sure? Is this really the decision that we have made? Like, are you sure? So these are things I still do to this day. And it's kind of 3 big overall aspects. The first one is, when you have a good call, quote unquote, or when you get that IV that the patient's like, oh, I'm a hard stick, I don't know if you're gonna get it, like, and you get it, or anything that's like that victory moment, write it down. Mm-hmm. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole of, hey, do I really deserve this patch? Or do I really deserve to be called a paramedic? Or when I walk in a house and everybody looks at me expecting me to lead the call and like have all the answers and do the right thing, are they sure about this? Read over those good triumph moments and realize, like, okay, maybe this one thing I didn't really excel at, but the next time, because I kind of know what I'm doing, when the next moment arises, I'm gonna learn from what I did, and I'm gonna do better at it. Mm-hmm. The second one, and we've kind of alluded to it, but it's talking over calls with other providers. And when you have that call that you're kind of wondering like, hey, could I have done this better? Or, man, I really fumbled the bag on that one. I have a very specific small list of people that I'll call, and I'll be like, hey, this is what happened. I did this, this, and this. I feel like I should have done this. Like, what are your thoughts? They'll give me the good and the bad and the ugly. And it's a matter of accepting that criticism, accepting that, yeah, you didn't do this good, or you should have done this, but hey, you did this, and that's what counts. Or worst case, hey, the patient made it to the hospital alive. At least you did that for them. But you accept the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you move on, and you show up to the next shift with a fresh perspective of, all right, this is what I'm going to work on today. Kind of taking those nitpick moments of, I'm going to work on this and I'm going to do better. And lastly, kind of like the big arc of all of this is the big key is being able to accept the idea that, yes, I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to learn from them and I'm going to grow. And kind of like you said, in given time, somebody's going to be under your wings, or somebody's going to be looking at you like you have all the answers. And being able to admit, like, yeah, I did this back in the gap, but since then I've learned this, or since then I've grown in this, because I still go back and practice skills, or I still review certain things. And even those moments where, like, if your student asks you a question, look at them and saying, like, I don't really know, let's look it up. And admitting, like, again, don't have all the answers. We're not expected to. But when that thing arises, humbly saying, I don't know, and that's okay.
Love it. I love it. And it's just hearing the criticism and not just hearing it, just going with it, right? It's and taking that and be like, okay, I'm not good at this. Let's crush it now. And criticism can be a scary thing to take on, especially when it's someone that you look up to. But people that actually care about you are going to give you criticism, and they're going to tell you how great you are and where you need to improve. And it's your job to listen to that. And if you listen to it and you embrace it and you crush it because you're training, man, you're going to be just like them, the people that look up to you. I love it. I think that's a lot of great little anecdotes. So thank you so much for bringing me on to talk about this topic. I think it's a huge topic for new paramedics.
Well, I appreciate you, my guy. That's all I have. And if that's all you have, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And like I say at the end of every episode, so with that,
the 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.